Book review.
Book review. Book review. Book review. Book. I haven't done book reviews before on YouTube, but I have done them on Periscope. And while it's nice having an audience to interact with live while you're doing it, I find that once the video is finished, there's no traction behind those Periscope videos. So there's just no point if you wanted to have an ongoing conversation or just share repeatedly questions with other people who might be interested, because they can't comment, can they? So I'm going to do it on YouTube. As an aside, I'm not trying to read books for the benefit of the channel. It's just that at the moment I'm trying to grow the channel and as well at the same time just read more and take myself out of the now, which I think is very detrimental to us all at the moment with regards to social media. Most importantly, I get frustrated whenever I can't quote somebody from something. I'm doing it now, and I'm always in admiration of others who can, when I'm listening to them on a podcast and they say da-da-da said this, and they use it as part of their conversation to enrich that conversation. I'm so proud of those people that they can do that. And so the idea of making this type of YouTube video is to sort of set in stone some of the ideas and quotes that are expressed and communicated in the book. So the first book First book I'm going to review for myself on my channel is a book recommended to me by Casey Neistat. Because I follow Casey's channel, I want to learn from him visually and make things interesting on my channel as well. Yeah, but you're stuck in the same pose on this YouTube video. Well, it's a book review, so what can I do? I also want to understand his philosophy, so that's why I kind of want to read some of the things that he reads as well. Originals attempts to explain some of the ideas that people have and the creative ways in which they've tried to implement those ideas into their workplace or their organization. The author draws examples from many different aspects of American society to explain how they've become successful in their field, whether it's a creative one or an organizational one, like the CIA. I just want to mention right away, and this is one of the problems that I had with the book, is that there's just too many examples from America, and I kind of felt like, wasn't there anybody else or anything else outside of America you could draw inspiration from as examples in your book? It kind of got a little bit tedious, and there was parts of it where they were talking about baseball, and I'm not really a fan of baseball. Baseball is a wholly American endeavor. When you're talking about people being creative in that field, it's like, okay, I get it, because you're talking about these things as universal ideas and values or abilities. But it just would have been nice if the author, Adam Grant, could have taken it further and jumped across the pond, maybe explored some sort of original act in Europe or in Asia. The very first chapter begins with a quote, which I'm sure we're all familiar with. In the past, with regard to the Bernard Shaw quote, I always thought that some of us wanted to push back against the world, and most of us were complacent with life. And I guess that is still strictly true, but where you've got all these unreasonable types, I do think now there's like a subset of people who are obviously just as unreasonable, but they're quite creative in trying to make those changes that they are feeling sort of exist for unreasonable reasons. And they're creative enough to sort of push that force that they're trying to instigate into the world. Now, I could scream all day on the streets and complain about the state of the environment, global warming, and try to get people on board with my argument, but how effective would that be? You're not going to get people standing up in a line saying, I'm totally on board with that message, this is amazing, let's do something for action for the environment. It's not going to work. People are going to be like, why are you shouting at me? I don't understand, and you're a fucking loony. So the book asks you to sort of understand better ways to deliver your message or your goals. I enjoyed especially the way the book explains mental processes and how procrastination is good for you, and that you can't just work incessantly. If your mind is sort of looking the other way mentally and you want to be distracted by something, then that's a natural thing, and you should let your brain do that rather than force yourself and stay inside, say, Final Cut, or stay inside this mode, I need to write 2,000 words by the end of the day. Just drop it, just leave it, it's fine. So in chapter 3, it asks you to pay attention to procrastination and to not feel guilty about anything if it arises. Original shows how it's beneficial and how it's useful in your workflow. So at the moment, I'm making and planning various YouTube videos. I want to write some articles, I have ideas, and I write down notes whenever I can. And if I get bored of, say, focusing on one YouTube video, I can switch it up and go to writing, or I can go and edit the audio for a podcast and deliberately have different jobs at different levels at the same time in my life. And it's just really, if the mind wants to wander, then let it wander, and you can let it wander onto another project instead. Of course, you're going to be distracted still. You might want to go and play a game, but that's fine, because the brain needs to work subconsciously. Switching tasks is supposed to be a benefit. And I've already taken some of those ideas on board, and I've started to change the way I work. My workflow has changed so that I feel less stressed out and less guilty. So, thanks, Adam. The book doesn't actually address George R.R. Martin. I'm doing it, because he is somebody who has more than one project going on at the same time, much to the annoyance of his fans. His fans probably hate him for this because they want him to focus on one particular thing, Game of Thrones. But he wants to work on Dunk and Egg, or some sort of backstory, some prequel with the Targaryens and whatever. But he likes to rotate through those things. Once he gets sort of stuck in the mud on one, he jumps on the other, and then his subconscious is working on ideas and explanations for the previous thing that he was working on. And he's on the record for saying that he needs to do this so that he can replenish his strength and not feel exhausted.
Well, I find that question, pretty offensive, frankly, when people start speculating about my death and my health. So, fuck you to those people.
There are 3 other things I'd like to share with you from this book. Now, one of the fun parts of the book was this idea of being too original, because what's going to happen is that people aren't going to get your idea because it's something that they've never encountered before. And funnily enough, this movie was very hard to grasp for the boardroom members at Disney, because it was the writers came with their own original story and wanted to pitch this as the idea for their next film, because before The Lion King, Disney were using other properties to make their stories. But in the boardroom meeting, someone said, "Oh, what you're trying to explain is like King Lear," and then someone said, "No, this is like Hamlet, but with lions." And once they made that mental connection from that Shakespearean play, Hamlet, with a bunch of lions, then they got it, and they were like, yes, let's make this movie now, because there was a context that they could take from something else and apply it to that original idea. Originals goes deeper and explains also the problems that they had with making this movie, because it wasn't so simple during its time when it was first crafted as an idea. It's so strange because we take it for granted now. Originals also says that originality doesn't need to be planned. This speech was never planned. It was written down in little pieces and little chunks here and there, but what happened is that because Martin Luther King had immersed himself with the things that he kind of knew what he needed to say, on the day it just came together. He had the audience in front of him, he could understand the emotion of the crowd, and then he crafted one of the finest speeches ever recorded, but it's not in his notes, not verbatim. So originals are saying that we don't have to plan everything to a meticulous detail, and you might even feel guilty about having crafted it because it took you no effort, and you might think, well, I needed to plan it better and then it would have been better. Not necessarily. The other one about being original depends on a situation, but also one's own position within an organization. And so the book talks about this lady who's in the CIA working in Europe. Then she transfers back to the American branch, and she hasn't made the connections and the real life friendships and relationships that you need to. So that when she implemented this idea of getting all the reports and all of the studies that the CIA produces, get them online so that you can have a faster way to share with one another on a local intranet, they were sort of like, whoa, we can't put digital information out there. People might take it and steal it. Then 9/11 happened, but once 9/11 happened, there was a greater reason to want to pool resources together so that sharing information could be faster for all the departments. And ego wasn't so much of a factor, it was just the fact of, we need to solve this terrorist threat. Something else had also changed, and that's that her position within the company, within the organization, had changed. And so that she wasn't just alone, and by the time 9/11 happened, she was in a totally different department which dealt with information sharing, and also she had built then a network of professional relationships so that when she proposed the idea, she got the backing because she made those human relationships as well. So it was a combination of situation and then those that are around you. Whereas before, she just walked in and expected everybody to just be on her side. I guess because you're all working for the same company. So that was interesting. Even though it was a very specific and very pro-American example. Look how great the agency is on the second try. Chapter 6 is an interesting discussion. It talks about firstborn children and later born children, and talks about how being born at different stages of a family's life influences the way you're thinking. The book outlines how the firstborn children typically go into medicine, finance, law, the high-paying jobs, because the parents are really strict on them to achieve in society. But it's the younger children that acquire more freedom, and they're able to express themselves in a more artistic sort of fashion and opt maybe for being a musician, a painter, a poet, a YouTuber. The younger children are also more likely to react against their elder siblings because they don't want to necessarily do the same thing as them. Now, Adam is careful to note in a huge footnote in his book that he's working off averages, and so while you might be watching this thinking, well, that sounds like bullshit, it's not probably going to reflect exactly every family's sort of dynamic, and there are going to be plenty of outliers. Chapter 8 explains how it's beneficial to have yourself in a difficult situation and then explain how you feel. So a lot of us don't like presenting, and what we find is that we obviously have to go and do it for whatever reason, and people will say, don't worry about it. But that's actually the worst thing you can say to somebody, by telling them not to do something. Instead, the idea is to say, you've got lots of energy, go for it. And you're using positive reinforcement instead of negative reinforcement, or you're suggesting a negative element to it by saying, don't worry. Of course they're going to do that. It's just like going up high and then saying, don't look down. What are we going to do? Look down. And so what they've done, instead of saying, don't worry, be calm, is they've tested loads of people in different groups with different sentences to see what they would do inside those situations. And what they found was that even if people were afraid or nervous, simply by saying, get excited, go for it, instead of saying, don't worry, actually increased their ability to present in a more beneficial, positive way. What's happening is that you're using that pent-up energy, that angst, that worry, to actually convert it into something else, and the person actually goes and does it. They are excited, and they are hungry for presenting, and then they're just better for it. And if we go back to the beginning of the book, like the procrastination thing, it's a simple trick that's going to get you further with whatever you're trying to do, whether it's the presentation or just get more work done. And that's what I really like about it, because it's really simple. It's not a highfalutin theoretical book on how to be original. It's actually using real-world examples, relatable human behavior as well, in order to get you and me to do things in a more original fashion, or maybe even just to push an idea that's not so original, but it's the way you're going to push that idea forward and allows you to be more successful. That's about it, really. I've read the book. I've reviewed with you some of the best parts that I think are the main takeaways to learn from it. Does that mean I don't need to buy the book? No, it doesn't mean that. There's actually a wealth of information in there, and I plan on reading it again at some point. It has already changed, as I said, my workflow and the way I approach things. I haven't necessarily got anything with which to quote the book with, but I do find it an interesting way to sort of acquire feedback or reflect on myself, so that if I see something that didn't go quite right, I might have more of an intuition to try and figure that out and try to be more successful. So there we are. Thank you for watching. As usual, you can, as with every fucking YouTuber does, you've got to like the video, you've got to subscribe to my channel, you've got to tap the bell so it's got the ringing thing so that you get all the notifications. You've got to do all these things to get more videos. Have at it.